Um, Welcome for the session. We have Girish Karnad and S.G. Vasudev, two stalwarts from the Kannada culture with us. And now we would like to share a bit, and I would like to engage them in a discussion about Ananthamurthy's works, Ananthamurthy in the context of Kannada culture, cultural scenario, Kannada political, social spaces. And before that, Ananthamurthy is one of the finest short story writer in Kannada. I would like to begin this bit by reading this tiny little bit from his novel, Suryana Kudure, which almost goes like poetry. Anantu, Anantu. ಇದೀಗ ಕಾಡು ಹೊಕ್ಕಿ ಕಾಡಲ್ಲಿ ಮರ 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 ಮರದ ಮೇಲೆ ಗಿಣಿ ಗಿಣಿ ಹಸಿರು ಗಿಣಿ ಎಲೆಗಳ ನಡುವೆ ಹಸಿರು 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 ಗಿಣಿ ಹಸಿರು ಗಿಣಿಗೆ ಬಾಗಿದ ಕೊಕ್ಕಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಂಪು ಹಣ್ಣು ಕೆಂಪು 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 ಹಣ್ಣು. This goes on like this. And Ananthamurthy, I believe, went for a Sanskrit school, then in a place called Durvasapura near Tirthalli. From Durvasapura he went to Tirthalli for his studies, from Tirthalli to Mysore to Birmingham to back to Mysore, then to Bangalore. He's been around as an academic career. He's been making important statements in the literary and socio-cultural spaces. And that was a generation which explored various kinds of possibilities in the culture. And now I would like to request Girish Karnad. Okay. I would like to request S.G. Vasudev, who is one of the important artists. And Ananthamurthy has written about Vasu and his works, appreciatingly saying that how Vasu's series of rickshaw, which he initially was working on and which initiated many things, was so important in representing Kannada through images and metaphors. Now I request Vasu to please say a few words along this kind of a journey and the spaces that allow for interactions.
How much time do we have?
And we have half an hour.
Thank you. Ellaru namaskara. I do not know whether I'm going to answer what she has asked, but my association with Ananthamurthy went back to 60s. I had known Karnad at that time in Chennai. I was studying in art school, and Karnad had come from England to Chennai, and so we became good friends. Both speaking Kannada made it much more closer. And my exposure to literature, Kannada literature particularly, is through Karnad's recommending certain books, and he's introducing people like Ananthamurthy, A.K. Ramanujan, and the entire section, P.V. Karnad. So I was one of those very lucky persons to have association with all these people and react to their works. And I even went with Karnad to Dharwar to show my works, and I met Bendre there, who really, I was one of the admirers of Bendre, his poetry, and one of his poems inspired me to do a series of paintings called Kalpavriksha. Now, coming to Ananthamurthy's thing, in the 60s, when Girish gave me the manuscript of Samsara, which he had received from G.B. Joshi, Vanarganthamala, a publisher. I believe Ananthamurthy sent one to Gopal Krishna Adiga, one to G.B. Joshi, and then when Girish gave it to me to read, immediately I felt that this is an excellent story to make a film. It's a fantastic story. So it started from there, and my association with Ananthamurthy, later on I met him there, and so the thing is that being a similar background, in the sense I am also a Brahmin like Ananthamurthy, and I understood details of what he has written in Samsara. That really helped me to do good art direction for the film, and also I was surrounded by some of these writers, which has really very influenced me a lot. And that's what I could say about my initiation with Ananthamurthy and his work.
Actually, Ananthamurthy remembers you as equally with Girish Karnad. Your contribution to Samskara as an art director and his contribution as a director to the film. And maybe Girish can say a few words and also talk about the interaction between the two of you.
Let me say one thing. Ananthamurthy was a great writer. He was a great friend. He influenced my life. My life has never been the same. Sorry, excuse me. Exact moment. Precision. Sorry, excuse me. I thought I'd switched it off. I did. Anyway, so he is a great influence, and there is no question. He is not the father figure of Kannada literature, as the compere said. That is nonsense. He's one of the great writers of our generation, and we need not over-exaggerate that. But I think what needs to be, since Ananthamurthy died, I have been asked to talk about him, write about him, and I have refused, because so much rubbish is spoken about him. And so much rubbish is spoken about our writers. In fact, we never face critically what a person has written and see to what extent it is effective. For instance, a fact that has never been mentioned about Samskara, which is probably the greatest novel of my generation, which has influenced a lot of people, is that when Samskara was published, the first review that appeared in Kasturi said, "This can never happen." The first person wrote, a person from a Brahmin said, the whole idea of a Brahmin dead, left there to this cannot happen, because there are mantras where you say, even if he may have done all kinds of papas, I want ablution because I want to do it, I don't want to let the body be there, etc., etc. And that there are things that allow you to do that as a part of human charity. Now, this is known to everyone. Ananthamurthy never accepted it. Ananthamurthy was always asked, how do you accept this? How did you do this? Because this is not possible. He always avoided the question. But the novel was important to us, and this I must mention, because of its structure, its beauty, its language. She read out passages from it, and the fact that the whole notion of the whole character of Praneshacharya, who judges a dead man and then goes through the process where he himself becomes a dead man, sleeps with the woman of the dead man's woman, and so on and so on and so on. So there are other, Samskara is a great novel, but as an analysis of Hindu Dharma, it's not correct. A lot of it is wrong, and Ananthamurthy didn't know his facts. So let me start off with that. Yeah. You want to go more, or shall I go more, or you want to say anything?
You can go
See, the reason I'm mentioning is this. It's amazing how much has been written about Ananthamurthy without mentioning this fact, this basic fact, that it's a great novel, but about a wrong thing. Because it was really based, if you want to know the basis on which, he told me, when I asked Ananthamurthy said to me, this happened in my village. And I was shooting Samskara in the village, so I went there and again find out what happened. What had happened was that one of his uncles had an untouchable mistress. The untouchable mistress had died, and her body had lain there because the uncle was dead and no one would touch an untouchable body. Now, that's an entirely different problem from what is Ananthamurthy presents as the problem of Samskara, which is of a Brahmin dead body being allowed to rot. Now, symbolically, it's beautiful. It's marvelous. We knew that we had read this letter. Still, we did the film, knowing perfectly well that this was wrong. Then this is not a correct criticism of Hinduism, because we thought it would be visually marvelous and it had an impact. But now that we are evaluating the man, I think one should be honest about it and face the fact that actually his analysis of Hinduism in Samskara is very, very baseless. It's shallow.
Yeah, actually this is the part of the Samskara and its visual text. And the visual text was quite dominant because it came as a film and it was seen and read and all. But the traditional concepts and the moral issues of the tradition, which were broken down during the Navya period. I think it's quite symbolic to that kind of a.
You see, what was important, as Vasudev knows, is Vasudev once said to me that when he read Samskara, he couldn't walk in Cholamandala at night because it seemed filled with this kind of mystery. You remember that, in the evening. Because the novel was so beautifully written, and it was one of the few novels which talked of a social problem but raised metaphysical problems.
Yeah.
The third part of Samskara here was a man who had read widely, read his existentialism, read his Kierkegaard, and all that comes out. And to us it was very exciting that it should be spoken about. That is the greatness of the novel. I'm not trying to condemn the novel. I'm trying to say that if you are analyzing it, you must face the fact that it is based on false premises.
And Vasu, would you like to say how Ananthamurthy's works, maybe you can begin with Samskara and say, how it allowed the parallel spaces for thinking or for the contemporariness of the Kannada culture?
I think Samskara was the first novel I read, and subsequently I read a few novels of his, and I also did the cover design for some of these books. And when I did Bharatipura cover design, Ananthamurthy said, "My God, what a line you have chosen from the novel." I said, "I read before I do the cover designs. I just don't do the designs without reading." And so I felt that, at that point of time when he wrote Samskara and Bharatipura, I was very, admired his writing. Subsequently, I did not really look into his. I read some of his novels, but I never felt that they were as powerful as those two, particularly Samskara. And so that for me, it's a sort of a turning point when I had no idea about doing anything in film, and I was a painter, and I was looking towards abstraction in my painting, but when it came to making film, I had to bring in realism. That realism and abstraction was very, very difficult thing to work with, and but I wanted everything to be so perfect in the film, particularly the way the location and the actors, everything, and it's something which really it was very challenging for me, and I did that. But the only thing which I introduced my abstraction was in the title cards. The title cards in the film, if you see, they're all line drawings, but they're all more abstract shapes. Okay. And so Ananthamurthy opened up many things for me. And as he says in the documentary film also, he says that people should not get influenced by their own writing. I mean, they should go forward. And Ananthamurthy told me when the film was made, Samskara was made, when he came for the shooting, he said, "Oh yeah, Vasudev is exactly how I conceived." I said, "Ananthamurthy, forget it. You wrote the novel, that's it. And now it's a different media altogether. We are working towards that media. And I'm trying to my best to bring whatever you have written in the novel, but then it is another medium. So you have got to sort of accept it. And I think you should forget Samskara and go ahead."
Actually, how come, Girish, that Ananthamurthy's most of the works, both of you were part of A.K. Ramanujan's translation of Samskara as a translated text into English, which has been quite popular and which has been taught around. And apart from that, Bharatipura, Ghatashraddha, and others have transcended into the film scripts, film texts. So something which has moved beyond Kannada spaces and got into the more popular and public space representing Kannada as such. Would you like to react to this?
Well, let's face one thing. Talking of Ananthamurthy's literature, after Samskara, he wrote some very brilliant short stories earlier, which made his name. Then he wrote Samskara. Then he wrote Suryan Kudre. Then he wrote nothing that was significant. All his later work is actually second-rate. Let's face it, Bharatipura is unreadable, actually, although it was recommended for what. Then Bhava, Divya, he knew that he had lost it, or something had lost. It happens to all of us. And really, ultimately, Ananthamurthy is to be judged as a writer. It will be on those short stories he wrote, which were brilliant, which to us were Revelation, and Suryan Kudre, and then Samsara. Now they became internationally famous thanks to A.K. Ramanujan, who translated them again and again because he loved that novel, and he prescribed that, because you must remember that Ramanujan was a professor of Indology in American universities, and everywhere he prescribed Samskara as a novel that would give you insight into Indian reality, into Indian villages. There was that whole generation of American students, I meant Indian students in America, know India only through Samskara. And to that, the person responsible for that is A.K. Ramanujan. There's no doubt at all.
And actually, as you said, Divya was the novel which was written in Hyderabad. When Divya was the novel which he wrote in Hyderabad when he was there as a guest faculty in the Center for Comparative Literature. And yeah, like maybe, after that, Divya's cover page, I think I have done the cover page for Divya with Shyam Sundar's painting on it. And as you said, once he started doing other works, and maybe later works more than literature, all his engagements with social issues came out beyond literature.
He was. There were two things about Ananthamurthy, that's his life, that one must admire. One, that he took very bold stands, public stands, in which very often we were associated. I mean, when the Karnataka government wanted to ban cow slaughter, he took a stand, and we all supported him, because we said, and when they wanted to introduce Bhagavad Gita in classes, and they wanted to bring Gangodaka, all these kind of nonsensical programs that the BJP government was trying to do, he opposed. We stood by him. He was very firm and very bold, and he was a great support to have. And in the Kannada public life, for instance, when BJP and the Kumaraswamy, the other Devegowda's son, they together formed a party, then they formed a government, then they broke, then they abused each other, and then they came and they wanted to form. It was Ananthamurthy who said, let's protest, and said, we don't want this government. And we all went in the streets and asked the governor, let's have them. I mean, these scoundrels don't want to have to be there at all. So that kind of stand he took on public issues, on,
And when he was offered a seat, I think he denied because they clubbed with BJP.
No, that's not true. He allowed a seat, but he was not given it. He pursued a Rajya Sabha seat like mad. He could have taken any Rajya Sabha seat.
But Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, as a contestant in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha.
No, he was not given. That's not true. Actually, and the point is that there is, of course, a famous photograph after J.D. Kumaraswamy was asked whether they would give him a nomination for this. Kumaraswamy said, Ananthamurthy andre yaru ivru? And so on. Who is this Ananthamurthy? And yet when Kumaraswamy went on some hunger strike, for some reason, Ananthamurthy got himself photographed feeding lime juice to Kumaraswamy. So there are these angles also which need to be looked at in the personality, and I think they make the person. I think we should not whitewash this, because this hagiography is what I find unbearable. It's like people who talk of Bhimsen Joshi but will not talk of his drinking, because they say, Kuditan and Thelbardittu. But the man drank openly, and that's what made his energy. And I think we must look at our artists with all their darker shades, and then we understand the complexity of the personality.
Do you think that the whole notion of freedom and free spaces for the citizens, the public, the marginalized, and other things, which have not prominently come up in his works, probably when it comes to gender, I think there is a restriction of that in his works. Do you think that has extended and as a different way of giving freedom and spaces to people, arguing for that in the public spaces in the later years?
But Lucy, you must remember that Karnataka has been very fortunate. Our writers have always taken public stands. Shivram Karanth returned his Padma Shri when Indira Gandhi declared the emergency. We have Kuvempu was responsible for talking out for the Dalits and so on. So we have a tradition of writers standing up for public issues, and in that sense, not only Ananthamurthy. Here we must remember Lankesh. You know what he did. Puchante. You know, that whole generation. Later D.R. Nagaraj. This whole tradition that a writer cannot sit in a corner. He must come out and speak out. That they created. That I must grant him.
I must
Yes.
say something which previously you were talking about Ananthamurthy's politics. Now, the thing is that I do not know whether it's a good occasion to say, but anyway, I want to say that. He said that he threw Saligrama in the river. Puja Mado, Saligrama in the river. Then he cut his Janavara, he did that. And he said, I married a Christian. He didn't say, I loved a Christian, I married a Christian. This is politics, I feel. And I think same person, later on, a few years later, D.R. Nagaraj was, he was very upset because Meshtru Janavara hakoltarante, Gayatri ಮಾಡ್ತಾರಂತೆ. So I told Ananthamurthy, why do you want to do this? He said, why can't I do that? I said, you do, whatever you want to do, you do. It's your personal things. But Masi Venkatesha Iyengar, Purti Narasimhachar, Dvendre, they are very orthodox religious people. But they never spoke about those things in public. That's what I felt. My differences with Ananthamurthy was those things. Otherwise, I respect him for a...
Maybe the whole period and the Navya tradition voiced a kind of resistance in a very prominent way. I think we need to talk about these politics in that context, probably.
Yes, I mean, everyone has contradictions.
Yeah.
Even I have contradictions. I'm not a perfect public figure. But we must recognize those contradictions and not whitewash them. I mean, the kind of documentary we saw, the rubbish that we saw for the last, the kind of documentary that Girish Kasarwalli has made on Ananthamurthy, which presents him as a great thinker who borrowed no ideas from elsewhere. I mean, almost every one of his ideas came from Gopal Gowda, from A.K. Ramanujan, which is good. I mean, I'm not saying that that's bad. My ideas also come from outside, and he was a great teacher. Ananthamurthy is a great contribution, along with the contribution of Lankesh also, and D.R. Nagaraj, and here we have Kambar also. These were great teachers. They were in the universities, and they created an intellectual atmosphere which reached out to the students, and that we have to acknowledge. But it's no use pretending that Ananthamurthy was a great thinker. He was not. He was just a good absorber of ideas. The one person in our generation who was a great thinker was A.K. Ramanujan, because he looked at things which had never been looked at before. Translations, vachanas, women's stories, women's position in society. That, for the first time, was looked at by Ramanujan. And that you have to admit.
Yeah, the characters, the kind of characters that come up in Ananthamurthy's short stories, for example, he's an amazing short story writer. And most of the characters, mostly the men characters, probably, are the heroes. They are not just black and white. There are gray areas in which probably both the heroes and the villains, or the hero and the substitute characters, they are a part of the same kind of an individual which we would see. And many a times you see Ananthamurthy himself as part of like Ananthu, or the urban and the rural, which is focused. And do you think this is, how do you compare this with other short story writers in Kannada?
You see, Ananthamurthy, as he himself admitted, his sources are that little childhood he has in Melige, his mother, his neighbors, and how he perceived them. And that come. When Samsara came in, I don't know whether to mention this, one of the criticisms made against him is that in Ananthamurthy's stories, all the Brahmin women are flat-chested, all the Shudra women are full-breasted. So it's entire G.H. Naik's comment on his sexual attitudes, and even he, in his discussion it came out. Now this is interesting, and it comes from a particular notion of what a Shudra woman is and what a Brahmin woman is from his background, that's all.
And
I sometimes felt that Ananthamurthy never developed out of it.
No, I was trying to read exactly the other way of seeing this. Then what about the men? Yeah, well, we know what Shudra women are, we know what Brahmin women are. What about the men?
Well, you talk. No. Vasudev, I've talked enough.
No. I think you can answer better.
So whether it's a Shudra man or a Brahmin man or whoever the man is, how is he?
You see, there are two models of Brahmins in his novels. One is the Gundacharya, the Lakshmanacharya, the retrograde Brahmin. The other model is Ananthamurthy. You know, Pranashacharya, after all, is based on Ananthamurthy's idea of himself. Handsome, tall, intelligent, goes to Kashi, he's understanding. You know,
But
the
you
whole
fitted
thing.
perfectly in that character.
Eh?
You did fit very perfectly in that character. And I think the
I'm
Pranashacharya became famous because of Girish Karnad.
I'm a good actor.
Yes, hats off to you. Vasu.
No, I think even in writing, Ramanujan told me once, Ananthamurthy wants to be like Lankesh. Lankesh wants to be like Ananthamurthy. In fact, in the film, Girish said Pranashacharya Ananthamurthy connection, whereas Naranappa was Lankesh. It was very, very, you know, it suited so well. So, I mean, we never thought about it at that time, but I spoke to Ramanujan later on. He told me this. The language Lankesh could write so well. Ananthamurthy used to feel that he should write like Lankesh. I mean, it's a very interesting thing. Ramanujan saw these things, you know, in them. Yeah.
Would you both like to share any anecdotes around Samsara, shooting and period?
I don't want to be rude to him.
No, I mean, when
Yeah, there are lots of them. I mean, he was a good friend. We spent 30 years together. I'm just pulling his leg, but he was a very interesting character. The point I want to make is he was not just a bland, Maharshi, Jnana Rishi that these films project him as. He was much more complex.
But I don't think he was...
Whatever. The Shishyas are very often more dangerous.
I think that the disciples and gang around him did that.
No, one thing he observed in art, Ananthamurthy was not exposed to art at all. Really speaking, he told me that.
What?
I do not know anything about art. You know?
Yes.
Didn't appreciate.
Yeah.
He didn't know how to appreciate it. But then, when he wanted to bring out his Rujavatu, the magazine which brought out after Adiga's Sakshi closed down, he asked me whether I could do the cover design for Rujavatu and write an article. So I did. I was working on Tree of Life at that time, and I did on Vriksha. I wrote. He said, that's the greatest thing which you could see. And he also observed in one thing, that how I use the Kannada alphabets in my work. And particularly when he saw my drawings on A.K. Ramanujan's poetry, and he came to the exhibition and he said, how you could use the Kannada words there. I mean, I was using the Kannada words in such a way, and I felt I got the inspiration to do these sort of things, mainly by reading the manuscripts, whether it is Girish's manuscripts or Ramanujan's or Ananthamurthy's, whosoever. The manuscripts gives ideas. The shape of it, you know, the way each one write, and that shape, it's such a beautiful thing. And so I try to work around those things, and which I think, for me, my connection, though art people say it's international, true, but my connection with local thing is Kannada literature, Kannada theatre, Kannada language, and Kannada alphabets. It's very important for me.
Actually, for a generation like us, you know, we have grown up reading Ananthamurthy, Girish Karnad, Kambar, all your contemporaries, and we appreciated. At the same time, we had the critical kind of, we had issues around the way you spoke and the way it was projected. And we also witnessed how all of you have represented in the Kannada socio-political spaces, which actually is a very big strength for us. I think Ananthamurthy as an individual who was daringly, who could say anything which he thought was right, and he could stand in the public spaces and just say that I don't like it. And now, after his demise, there are a few of you, but even then, you know, for the generation like us, you know, somewhere we feel that, well, tomorrow, what happens?
No, he leaves a blank space. There is no question that there is no one like him in any other person in Kannada, that in taking a bold stand, I miss him. I miss him as a friend. I mean, because one could always go to him and talk to him and ask him to take a public stand. There are not many writers like that who will take a public stand on public issues and boldly this. So, and let me, for all my criticism of Ananthamurthy, let me say right away that the day I read Samsara, my life was changed. Because my whole perception of Kannada literature, my whole perception of Kannada society, my whole perception of everything, how Kannada should be written, was changed in that one day. So, I'm saying this only because one has to acknowledge the complexity of the man and not just whitewash him.
And you are Ananthamurthy, in a way, as far as I have interacted with him, and I've seen him interact with people, he would, if he did not know certain new things, right from handling computers to feminism to post-colonial studies or new kind of thinking, when you said something, if he was curious about it, and when he quoted wrong, and when you corrected it, when you suggested it, he very humbly accepted that. And that was something which was very encouraging for the younger generation. And would you like to say something else about?
No, this is true of Ananthamurthy. This is true of Ramanujan. For instance, if you told Ramanujan that something was wrong, he would accept it. Yeah. I never got to know Lankesh that well or Puchante that well, so I don't know whether, Another person of that generation who was very stimulating was Subarna, what he did in Hegodo and so on. It was a generation full of very interesting people doing interesting things because a whole new Karnataka was emerging. In now the present day Karnataka, I'm an old man. I don't know. I only see it as the younger Karnataka, not my Karnataka. But in our Karnataka, we were lucky to have contemporaries like that, people like that.
And I think all of you in different spaces different Kannada spaces together contributed a lot for Kannada and Kannada culture, literature, which was part of it, and the socio.
And a poet like Adiga, for instance,
yes.
Or a critic like Kirtinath Kurtkoti.
Yes.
They were all a part of our growing up, and they created our world.
And socio-literary movements that followed Navya, like Dalit Bandaya Chadvali or the women writing, for example, I think they were quite critical about the writings of the Navya writers, who were mostly male, and who the best part of Navya's contribution probably is women started writing during that.
You see, when I look at my contemporary Kannada writers, it strikes me that Ananthamurthy's generation, my generation, we wrote about what was relevant to us. That is, the villages we came from, the background, the orthodoxy, the Brahmin orthodoxy, the backwardness, and so on. But the generation that's growing up in Bangalore seems incapable of writing about Bangalore. I don't know a single Kannada novel today which captures Bangalore as it is today in its complexity. It's almost as though these writers are frightened. They can't grasp the complexity, like a Puttappa caught, say, in Kanur Hegadati or something, the complexity of a traditional Vakkalega society. Now, this I want to mention. Navyas opened themselves out to the society around them, but certainly the next generation doesn't seem to have done it. There is no work in Kannada that I have read. Short stories there are. They're very good short stories by Vivek Shanbhag, Jayant Kaikini and others, and by many Dalit writers, but hardly any good novel, not one that I know.
Bangalore has also become more cosmopolitan, and it's inviting people, it's extending beyond being Bangalore as an identity itself, though it retains, of course it retains.
But there is such a thing as a Bangalore experience. I mean,
yeah. Vasu?
But in fact, the field I am in, the art field, we also had a similar problem like what maybe Ananthamurthy had or Girish Karnad had in 60s. That identity, Indian identity, which we discussed amongst us, the artist community. But we didn't want to just follow what West was doing, because all our art schools taught the Western way of art. Anyway, so we in the nation, at least about 40-50 artists, we tried our best to bring in certain quote-unquote Indianness in our work. But what has happened in the last 10-15 years is globalization has come in. and the curators from all over the West, they're coming in, and they are telling our artists to do like what they are doing there. And so what is happening is, in the name of globalization, the community, they're losing the track, which we have really so well built up. This is one thing which worries me a lot. But at the same time, I think there are very good young artists who are doing excellent work. Their understanding of, in fact, somebody asked me, how could you, this sort of a situation you had, like all these writers, you knew their work and you knew them. I said, it just happened. It was just happened in my life. But you can also create it if you want. It's a question of how you open up yourself to all these things. Now, I am of the opinion that I think there is still good hope amongst the youngsters who are looking towards something. Also, they may create something different, something contemporary Indian, and I'm looking for that sort of a thing to happen, if not now, another 10 years later. But in literature, you had all these movements, Navya, this one, that didn't happen in an art. That's a different thing altogether.
And Ananthamurthy, in his part of his biography, there is one small piece where he keeps looking at the carpenter, a Rajasthani carpenter who's been working in his house, and he says he worked the whole day as if he was taking rest. And gradually, the narration continues to saying that he talks about how death and the family and the relationships together are approaching him, and he starts feeling about that things are ending, and almost now it's high time. And he would say that I would now want to write every day. The whole passage starts like that. And I think his engagement with culture, Kannada, and the political spaces kept him going as a very, very strong mind, Would you like to say something?
Joie de vivre was quite amazing, even when he was ill and so on. The way he engaged himself with social issues, cultural issues, it was just marvelous. He was, in that sense, not just a great model, a great teacher, and a great writer. A great contemporary, I must say.
Yeah. Though he was very much pained by certain threats and things, he did not walk,
so,
but he just
I think he enjoyed it also. So it's a part of that life, you see.
Yeah. Now I would you like to say anything else? It should be.
I think I've finished. Thank you.
I would like to end the discussion with by reading this tiny little passage again from Suryana Kudure, where Hade Venkta will be giving a bath to Ananta. Anantanna, Anantanna, Changane haro Anantanna, Suryana horo Anantanna, ಈಗ ಬಿಡ್ತು ಬಿಡ್ತು ಸಿಟ್ಟು ಬಿಡ್ತು ಸಿಡುವು ಬಿಡ್ತು ಗರ್ವ ಬಿಡ್ತು ರಾವು ಬಿಡ್ತು ದುಡ್ಡಿನ ಮೇಲಿನ ಮೋಹ ಬಿಡ್ತು ಹೆಸರಿನ ಮೇಲಿನ ಜರ್ಬು ಬಿಡ್ತು ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಿಡ್ತು ಅಪ್ಪನ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಅಮ್ಮನ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮಂತ್ರಿ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ತಂತ್ರಿ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಸೂಳೆ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ರಂಡೆ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮುಂಡೆ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಸುಡುಗಾಡು ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಯೋನಿ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಓಣಿ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಹರಕಲು ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮುರುಕಲು ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಓದೋ ಎಲ್ಲ ಪುಸ್ತಕದ ದೃಷ್ಟಿ ಬಿಡ್ತು ಉಳಿದಿದ್ದೊಂದೇ ಸೂರ್ಯನ ಕುದುರೆ ನೀನೇ ಸೂರ್ಯ ನೀನೇ ಕುದುರೆ ಅನಂತಣ್ಣ ಚಂಗನೆ ಹಾರೋ ಅನಂತಣ್ಣ ಸೂರ್ಯನ ಹೊರೋ ಅನಂತಣ್ಣ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.